And we're actually going to start off with Miss Erika.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erika Zamora. I use she, her pronouns. If you are having trouble hearing me, let me know. I've had mic issues, which is why I've got the headset going. But I am the current director in the Office of Social Change and Intercultural Engagement. Our office is within the Division of Student Affairs, and we do programs like the Connect Mentorship Program for incoming first-year students of color. We advise some of the culturally based student organizations, as well as work with a lot of our community engagement initiatives within student affairs. I have been at SMU since 2013. And I'm excited to be with you all here today.
Thank you. We are happy to have you. And next we have Austin.
Hey everybody, my name is Austin Hickle. I'm the Student Body Vice President for the 2020-2021 school year. I'm majoring in political science as well as economics, and I'm a junior. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you, Austin. And next we have Ryan Cole.
Hello, yes, I am Ryan, and I work in Meadows, and I do all the admission and recruitment stuff for the undergraduate programs, and I actually attended SMU as a student and studied in Meadows. I studied music, so I have technically been walking these halls since fall of 2009, and still here, so yeah.
And a blessing it is to have you, Ryan.
Happy to be here.
And next we have Miss Erika.
Good evening, everybody. I am Erika Fadel, and I am at the law school. I'm the director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and I graduated from the law school in 1998 and have returned about 3 years ago to serve there, supporting students through my work with admissions, with career services, with programming around first generation students and around our diversity students, making sure that they feel like they have a sense of belonging in our community. And I also do faculty and staff training and community outreach. And so my role is pretty broad at the law school, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. And I thank you all for having me tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Miss Erika. And last but not least, we have Dr. Carr.
I'm Darryl Dickson-Carr. I'm a professor and chair of the English department. And I've been at SMU since 2006. I came here from Florida State University, where I taught for 11 years. I teach courses in African-American literature and American literature. And I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Me and Lawrence want to use you all's time as efficiently as we can. So we want to jump right into the questions. And our first question for you all is this: what are steps we need to make at SMU to sustain a community of diversity and inclusion? And anyone can take that question and expound.
Well, I'll start, I guess. I think it first starts with recruitment, right? You got to get the students in, and so to do that, you have to have an intentional outreach plan to encourage students to be interested in SMU and to pursue it academically. And that starts, in middle school and, of course, reaching out to high schoolers and just letting students know that you are present and that you are desiring for them to consider you. And then part of that as well is you have to make the institution a welcoming place, a place where people feel like they have a sense of belonging, where they can create a community and feel connected. So that when they do come, after you've done the efforts for recruitment and you bring them onto campus, that they feel like the place is a place where they are comfortable, where they are affirmed, where they are challenged academically, where they are allowed to grow, where they're allowed to make mistakes and to rebound, and to just grow into the adults that they are created to be. So I think, it's multi-layered in terms of creating the environment, and bringing students into it, and then allowing for them to have success so that their experience here is one that when they leave as alumni, that they look back on fondly and want to continue to give to the community. So I think those are some key aspects of growing the community, because it's your folks who are on your campus and who are your alumni who are your best ambassadors for the institution.
Yes.
I want to jump off that because I think the recruitment is a huge aspect of what steps SMU can take to create a more welcoming environment. Because when it comes down to it, it is students who create the culture. Of course, administration has a big role in that, but it is recruitment. And one statistic I want to add to it that I find quite shocking and quite embarrassing actually for SMU is that the New York Times every year does what's called the Access Index, and they rank schools based off the economic diversity. So how many Pell Grant students does a school admit and graduate? SMU, the Access Index ranks schools that have a 75% graduation rate. So it's about 175 schools in the nation that have that. SMU typically ranks around 161 at 159, 161, the bottom of the bottom in this ranking. And from what we know and from what that ranking shows, it's not for lack of funding. It's truly from potentially lack of commitment or lack of spending the money wisely. And so I think steps that SMU can take is understanding that there has to be a willingness to recruit students from all backgrounds so that we can create a more welcoming environment. But recruitment matters a lot. And I think how do we do that? What are the steps we can take? I think it comes from students. I think if there is a willingness from students to say we demand a more welcoming environment and we're willing to take the steps for that, the administration will follow. We've seen that in a lot of aspects. The administration responds to students and who are taking initiative. And so I think it is student initiative that can help us reimagine and repurpose our recruitment efforts.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Erika.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that something that someone brought up in an earlier panel, but people have spoken about for years, is that in terms of recruitment, SMU does not recruit as aggressively in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as it should. There are a lot of really fantastic students in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but SMU for many years has treated them as if they didn't exist. And in some ways, that builds this idea of SMU as a bubble. It's almost as if it's kind of being planted in the middle of Dallas-Fort Worth, but is not of Dallas-Fort Worth. And so any efforts to try to integrate SMU into the larger Dallas community really can't obtain until there are more aggressive efforts to recruit local students, in addition to, of course, the very aggressive recruitment SMU does for students from Florida and California and elsewhere in the country. But this is why you have so many people that are Dallas natives. One of my close friends is one of them who said, he's been here for almost 30 years. He says, I've rarely set foot on SMU's campus because I have no reason to. And a lot of students don't even know that SMU really exists or they have any chance to get into it. And that's a sign of a lack of diversity and inclusion, that people just assume that SMU is this place that's closed off. And that kind of outreach has to be part of any effort to bring in students. And again, the students can come from very economically diverse backgrounds, but SMU does not really recruit them very hard. And so that's the reputation that it has. Once that changes, you'll begin to see SMU's image change, and that will make students feel that this is a place where they would be welcome.
And can I add, I'm sorry, Erika, were you about to jump in? Okay. Can I just say that I think that Austin has a point about student activism, but I think that it is, that the problem requires a dimensional approach in the sense that, and I'm not using the right word, in the sense that it requires administrators to be on board, right? It requires the leadership of the institution to be on board so that all of us can be pushing in the same direction for diversity and inclusion. And it requires that people take a stand, like this is something that is important. And because it is important, these are the things that we are going to do. I think there's always backlash or questions or critique when you are moving forward with diversity and inclusion efforts. But you have to, I think, kind of plant your flag and move forward. And it requires, when students come, they need to be able to see that the faculty and staff are diverse, right? That there is a commitment at that level. They need to see that the administrators are not just giving lip service to their concerns and waiting them out for the 4 years that they're there, but that they're actually taking action to make some specific changes. I think the Black Unity Forum and the president's response to it, it seems like it's going to be a good push forward with all of the demands associated with it. And one of those, of course, has to do with recruitment, students and faculty, and just the whole gamut. But I do think, Austin, that the students' time here is short, and that other folks need to be rowing just as heavily and just as fiercely as students.
You went exactly where I was going to go, Erika, with that. I think that recruitment is part of it, right? But it's also a chicken or the egg kind of thing, because we don't want to recruit students to come to SMU if we don't have the support structures in place to truly support them through their 4 years, right? And I think that's a challenge we have sometimes, because there's so many different types of support that are needed, right? There's, of course, your basic stuff. We need to make sure financial aid processes are clear. We need to make sure that, everyone is able to eat and have a place to sleep, like those basic needs. But then there's also a level of, are there enough people who can speak to students about their experiences feeling marginalized on campus, who can process those and like truly walk with you through what it means to develop during your time here? And I think that there's a two-parter thing. There's like the actual supportive programs and things that can connect you to each other and to resources and to the community that will lift you through. But there's also a dire need to make sure that every single staff member we hire, whether they're in an office of diversity or a multicultural office or not, has that level of understanding, can walk and speak and really sit with the students who might be going through different things and hear them and like affirm identity, right? And so I think there's a couple, you said it, a multi-layered approach, and I don't know if that's quite the right word for how complex it can get, but there's so many parts in which I think that support once a student gets here can be just as integral, because I don't want to lie and say that like, hey, you're gonna have the easiest time, it's this, right? Like we want to say, hey, this can be a challenging environment, but here, let's connect you to the people that can help you walk through this if you ever encounter anything or need to process anything, whatever. So I think that those are a couple of things that are pretty important.
And Chrislyn, yes, I think it's working. One of the words that stood out so much to me in your question was sustain. And I will tell you, as a recruiter who actually came from the central admission office, where I actually worked recruiting Dallas ISD, hitting the pavement, going to all these schools and talking to counselors and talking to students, it is, you do country of basically people feeling isolated and feeling like SMU was not their local school. So you have that whole kind of local aspect that you have to come up against, because you might get a student excited and interested, and then they hit that wall when financial aid doesn't work out. You hit that wall when they're the best student at a school. For whatever reason, they don't end up making it to SMU, or they get to SMU and they don't end up making it through SMU. And then that becomes the story in that high school, that even our best student, SMU didn't care about. So it's really difficult when you come up against a legacy of whatever the opposite of inclusion is. So that is tough. However, what I have found is when I have had those successes, when students in this very Zoom that I have, fought for and been really supportive of throughout the admission process, you do kind of have that thing that Erika was talking about, like, I don't want to lie to you and say it's going to be this wonderful oasis of love and inclusion. But there are pockets of that. And I think that making sure that that is kind of being worked on in every aspect is so, so important. And so I think to have that, that consistency, policy has to happen, because it's one thing for one person to do something or one person to care, but unless it's, all faculty members have to X, Y, and Z, all staff members must complete whatever, we're not at that point yet. And I think that's where we have gaps, so that we don't have that consistency of everything. I'm seeing Ty's comment, of seeing that consistency of things actually working and improving and staying consistent. So then we can be better from there. Where it's kind of an ebb and flow that I think I've seen in my 11 years being at SMU.
Those were awesome, great first responses, guys. I want to shift the conversation a little bit here, and move into a question that is related, which is specifically, how do you guys as staff, as faculty, as employees of SMU, help avoid siloing or isolating students among the population? Because sometimes, whether they're in Black student organizations on campus or the Muslim Student Association or other groups on campus, how do you get them to, foment dialogue between each other? How do you get them to form bonds that can help create that kind of community culture that we're striving towards?
I can start with that one a little bit because we advise so many different student organizations out of our office. I think that one of the biggest challenges that I have, just even in thinking about who's advised out of our office, is that different student organizations are in different places, often developmentally, right? So within their comfort or even understanding of how powerful their voice could be and how advocacy could work, if they organize differently or organize dialogues more often. And that's part of what I've been very impressed with, seeing all the topics that you all have covered and things like that, because I think that it does take people talking to each other, I think, to widen that community as well, right? And to acknowledge that learning comes from the classroom, learning comes from all the things you participate in, but learning also comes from each other, right? And so I think that is one of the biggest challenges that I personally have faced, is that, like, I'll talk to an organization and be like, you should talk to them. Like, this is something that we should all be gathering around together. And they're like, yeah. But they're just not, some students are not there yet. And so, we try to bring some people along, and it works sometimes on, more individual bases. And I think that sometimes it is, it's helpful to gather people in the larger space. So we've talked a lot about how to evolve our Connect program, for incoming first year students. And I know that, I know a bunch of you at least came to a couple of days of it, where our goal is not necessarily like, oh, we're gonna hold your hand throughout the whole year, but we want to get everyone in the room together so that some of the faces that might be allies and helpful to you, and make those connections early and as early as possible, because we know how valuable they can be. And we've heard students say, like, I didn't realize that some of these people in Connect would be my strongest confidants when I went through, a bias incident that really shook me my end of my sophomore year. And I knew the people that I could go to were the people who were part of that program. So I think it's challenging sometimes, right? Because I think that when different communities haven't spent time with each other, or there is some level of misunderstanding or miscommunication that can take intervention, but it also, not intervention, mediation, that's what I meant, like someone to come in and actually facilitate conversation. But I do think that some of it is, it's possible when we start to push each other a little, but I do think it's a challenge on this campus for sure too.
I wanted to suggest something. This may be slightly outside the scope of Lawrence's question, but I'm thinking about a former student who was actually president of ABS at one time, and coming to me and asking advice on how to be a leader of ABS. And one thing that was remarkable about the conversation that we had was that, and this is something I've noticed at SMU over the years, is that we've got a lot of really fantastic students, and the events most recently in response to Black Lives Matter this past spring and summer, especially after the murder of George Floyd, has really shown a very different and very welcome, refreshing character to the students and their willingness to take leadership. But what happened in the past is that there are a lot of students who really had no context for what it means to engage in this sort of sustained level of leadership and activism. And so, I would say, go read Malcolm X, go read Martin Luther King Jr., and other leaders who've done this. And it was like these people didn't exist. And that was really disturbing to me at the time, is that this is an institution of higher education, and yet a lot of the students really needed to do that I've met had to do a deeper dive into a long history of activism and leadership. People have been doing this for decades, hundreds of years. That's something that actually takes study to do this, as well as reaching out and having conversations with people in other organizations, other communities, and just engaging in dialogue and saying, let's get together and put our heads together for some kind of common goal. But it also takes a certain degree of study and people saying, hey, here's some examples of how people did things in the past, strategies that they used to get what they wanted. When Black Lives Matter in 2015, came out and said, we're going to take as a model what folks did back in 1969, that was the right thing to do. It was to say, the people from an earlier generation, they gave us a blueprint, and now we're going to update that blueprint because the problems were the same. That to me was a real ground shift, a real groundswell, and that is really, to me, holds the key to getting out of those silos. Is realizing that if you want to get something done, you do have to have allies, and the way to develop allies is you have to cultivate, first of all, personal relationships, but also just understand what other groups need, what their wants are, how they're similar to and different from yours, and that takes a lot of dialogue, and work, but the rewards are immeasurable, and I think we've seen that recently. It's been really amazing to see how so many students from many different backgrounds have come together behind these causes.
Yeah,
Well, I think no, go ahead, sister.
Please, Erika, go ahead. I was gonna move us on a different train, so please go ahead.
Well, I think that at the law school, it may be a little bit different only because all of the first years are coming in and pretty much having the same experience. And though they're broken down into various sections, they are kind of in a group together going through the same thing. And when you're all going through the same trauma, that creates some connection that you wouldn't experience if you were, often going in different directions. And so I think students have the opportunity to identify it through their classrooms, who their allies are and who are not their allies, and have the opportunity to create connections with folks who are like-minded. And then I think that trickles up, if you will, to student organizations, because those students are then become leaders, and they've had an opportunity to get to know each other through activities and through classroom experience. And so when the George Floyd killing happened, we saw that our Black Law Students Association stepped out in front, of course, but our Hispanic Law Students were right with them, and our Women in Law Association were right with them because they already had those community bonds from the experiences that they had gone through and had already made connections early on in their time together. So I think that the students don't experience the silo in maybe the same way other undergrad student orgs might. But I think COVID has really been a challenge just for connection generally. And so it'll be interesting to see how this first year class comes out of COVID, because they have been learning remotely and have not had that same level of interaction with their colleagues that they would have had if they had been in person. So I think as an administrator, and I know that our administration in particular is always trying to brainstorm about how we can bring people together, because we're looking at them as law students who will be entering the profession together, and they're going to be colleagues for most of their lives. And this is where some of those relationships begin.
Yes, I'm so glad that you guys brought that up, Dr. Carr and Erika, because it is leading us right to our next question. You guys talking about our racial climate and what has happened amidst COVID in 2020 and beyond and before. I want to ask you, that led me to this question, which is, does SMU do a satisfactory job of addressing apathy toward racial issues and stereotypes perpetuated on this campus? Because hearing the students, like with the women in law and things like that, it seems that the students are standing together, but in terms of admin, our president, things of that nature, how do you guys react to that? How do you guys think of in those terms?
Well, I will say that I think that there have definitely been efforts happening over the past several years. Well, more recently than before. So I've seen more efforts recently than I have in the past years, which has definitely been good. And I think SMU tends to work in constituency kind of groups, which can be really helpful. However, I think that there's still lots of work to be done kind of on an individual level, because it feels like there has to be some type of messaging or action from leadership down, as opposed to an individual, hey, I'm your colleague, what's going on with this? Or, and I think sometimes people are nervous to take the initiative, but I think that's something that I don't see is encouragement for people to individually kind of reach out or learn more, or take action on their own as their own individual. I see a lot more of a we, this school, this university, this office type language. So I think that it is also maybe tough because we don't have a whole lot of diversity in higher leadership positions. I mean, you look at our deans and our the president's executive board and all that stuff. So I don't know if we have enough influence to kind of take that those action steps to a personal level. So that's something that I would hope to see. And I think it can be difficult too for people because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to step on. I'm wondering, like, teachers or administrators or staff members come to you individually and specifically and ask, how you're handling things, or, how your community is, or how your family is doing. I think people have kind of been a little bit walking eggshells with that, but they're happy to, repost something from the university. But those individual conversations, I think, are still fewer and farther between than I'd like.
I think that's a great point. And I think the point of that activism that comes kind of the lowest branch activism of reposting something, something we see a lot, not only at SMU, but really throughout a lot of different places, particularly in my generation. And I think some of what that comes from is lack of understanding of really what the core issues are, or the vocabulary, or other things like that. And that's something actually in Student Senate, our DNI caucus, I believe Taylor Johnson's here tonight as well. She's actually taken a great initiative to really start those conversations and to provide insight into the vocabulary and into how you, as an individual, as students, we can have conversations that really get somewhere, not only with other students, but also faculty and going forward. And so I think that's something that, again, I think we can control. I think we can start it by just having the conversations, but really tackling the core issue of vocabulary and what type of conversations we need to have.
So I think that I took notes. I think that what Ryan said about working in constituencies, and that sometimes is really helpful. I agree, because I think sometimes we forget about different voices, like especially of not just how our faculty and staff are doing, what are they doing to do more, but also how are we supporting our faculty and staff of color and retaining them, supporting them through everything, because they're often carrying more than some of their counterparts, right? So I think that that is true, and it is sometimes helpful, but I think it also starts to create, and where I'm, get sometimes frustrated, is that the constituencies and what people are working on are not often speaking to each other. So sometimes that's making people double efforts. And I'm like, you're both working on the same thing. Why are you working on them differently? But sometimes it also leaves cracks, right? So then I'm like, okay, so who's working on this? Like who's on some of these things? So I think that there's some, there's a lot of challenge with communication of not only what is happening, but how it's happening. The philosophy on approach sometimes can vary between different levels of administration. I'm in student affairs face-to-face with students a lot more. So I'm like, students first before everything, sometimes. And, I don't know that that's necessarily a right or wrong approach sometimes, right? I think there are other things I need to think about. But one of the things that I start to notice in working with students so often is that it can be, I don't remember, it might have been you, Erika, that mentioned it earlier, but the undergraduate, or a student's lifespan at SMU is pretty short. I can't remember who said that, but like is only so many years, right? And I do think that people sometimes, maybe not super consciously, but are waiting out some students to graduate, right? So I think it's important to cultivate a culture of understanding in some of these organizations, in some of these like unofficial groups and organizations, of understanding where we've been and where we're going, because that's how we continue to hold people accountable to the things that we have wanted, right? I saw I started in the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs the summer of 2016. So right after the first like wave of Black at SMU meetings. I was still at SMU, but I wasn't yet in Multicultural Student Affairs. And so I have seen those students who were part of Black at SMU from when they started, and some of them in their first year, to now they're all graduated. And I think some of their original intent has carried on for sure. And the way that the demands have been revisited, and the way that a couple of us have incorporated the demands and the actual history of student activism into lessons that we do, into workshops, into classes. And I think that Dr. Dickson-Carr said it, like there's people who have been doing this, right? And so even on this very campus, there have been students who have sat in the president's office, who have gone through so many different versions of the same conversation. And so I think that there is it's sometimes I don't know that I can answer satisfactory or not, because I think there's always work to be done. And I think that I am trying to, our office tries to help carry forward as much as possible the vision of the students before. How has that evolved, and what is the vision that you all even are creating now within doing this series, within all the things that, all these, I recognize so many different names that are involved in so many different parts of campus, but how are we then making sure that that's going to be passed on to, so that the things that we say we want to hold people accountable to, we can continue to hold them accountable to long after you may leave the hilltop.
I have one note there, unless anyone else is supposed to speak. I don't want to come in again. I think that's a great point. And I think one of the frustrations that Black students have had at SMU, and really minority students and all have had at SMU, is that, they make a list of demands, and I believe in, 1984, that my date's probably wrong, and none of that has happened. And they have to make another list of demands, really building off of a national protest and national focus. And so what's going to happen now? How can we ensure that there are policies? I believe Dr. Dickson-Carr brought this up. Where are the policies that we can implement now to ensure that we don't have to wait for another man to get murdered, another woman to get murdered, so that there is this national focus, and so that we can change. And I think one thing that we can do, and I've actually worked with Taylor as well on this, is that this problem is not unique to SMU. We're focused on SMU on this panel, but this is nationwide. And one thing that we've worked with is with SGAs around DFW, we call it the DFW Student Justice Coalition, to really work together and to communicate kind of as if we're different constituents within our own SGAs, to say what are the impacts, what are the changes we can make within our SGAs, and really be a voice together for the DFW area as the student governments, to hopefully really impact change, and to really ensure that going forward that we don't have to wait around, and that there will be change now.
I wanted to say something that I've noticed ever since I came to SMU is in terms of its physical space and the actual physical culture of SMU, is that of course the accent is on what a beautiful campus this is, and how to preserve that. Well, there's a problem with preserving a beautiful campus, which is that you don't want anything to mess it up, like people protesting and having teach-ins or public discussions of issues where everybody can hear it, and as opposed to having it in side rooms where nobody will see it. And I think that sort of culture of SMU, where you go on the quad and you go out in the boulevard, and it's pristine, and people are throwing frisbees, but there's no real public discussion of issues. We saw a change in that when people were marching and protesting, coming up to Dallas Hall steps and the like. And that was, to me, that was the most SMU became like so many other universities, where students feel free to do that at any time, not to necessarily always to be disruptive, however you want to define that, but really just to make sure that this is a chance to engage in the hard issues that really are important to this society, and to talk about that in a space that's safe to do that, where one can have real intellectual exchange. That's what SMU has prided itself on. But the space in which you do it, I think, really matters. You have to be able to feel free that this is a place where we can talk, and people can actually talk to each other and really engage each other. And that, I think, that's I think one way to address this question of apathy. If you walk across campus and you never have to see anything that disturbs your eyesight, or disturbs your sensibility, then that breeds apathy. But if you realize that I'm part of a community, and I might have to see something that might make me think, might make me angry, or at least again primarily make me think, and that this is part of my normal engagement. That's how you really make the best of an educational experience. It's not just what happens in the classroom. And so that's something to think about. How can the university make safer spaces for students to engage in quality discussion and presentation of the difficult issues that they have?
Well, and one of the things that I'm hopeful about is that, now that every school has a diversity and inclusion officer, that, and I'm sorry, my dogs are starting to act up in the background. My daughter just got home, so I apologize. But that the diversity and inclusion officers in their respective places will be mindful of student issues, right? And will continue to push those forward and continue to keep these issues at the forefront in their respective institutions, but collectively, and that we would all have a sense of what is happening, so that that sense of connectedness will happen. And we'll be sharing information about what's happening in Meadows, what's happening in Lisle, what's happening in Cox, and that some of the silo issue can be clamped down, and then also the issue of the space to have the conversation. My hope is that the conversation will remain active and lively around these issues, because just because there is not some trauma that has occurred, that does not mean that there are not issues that still need to be addressed.
I want to add one quick thing, and it's exactly that point. I just want to shout out almost to the Black Lives Matter team that's put this together. Despite the pandemic, despite everything going on, this team is put together. We're all here today because of the team, because of your work, and we're starting these conversations. And although the pandemic has limited the spaces we have, although the space was already limited prior to the pandemic, I think what they're starting here, this foundation that this team has put together, will allow these conversations to start happening and continue to happen and keep at the forefront. So just that's the value, one of the values I see to these type of discussions and the protests that we all attended back in September.
Kristen or Lawrence, I know you're probably wanting to move on. I just have one quick thing that I thought of in kind of the reflection of this past decade or so. And I think one thing that does give me a lot of hope is the fact that, and Eric, I don't know if you will agree with this from your time as a student to now, is that I think we've gone a little bit from just like check boxes. Like Dr. Carr was saying, like, oh, you can have a conversation, but as long as it's over there and doesn't disrupt us, like we know we still, tout that we allow this or we have this happening. And we've shifted a little bit from that. And I'll give you one explanation or one example. When I first started in the admission office, we used to have this event that had been going on for years called the Multicultural Recruitment Conference. And it was essentially welcoming Dallas ISD students onto campus to talk to them about different things. And I was kind of just like, by calling it that, it kind of feels like if I'm a student involved in this and attending this program, you really only care about me because you think I'm going to fit a multicultural box that you can check off to try to not be at the bottom of those lists like Austin mentioned. And I was like, can we just call this Dallas ISD at SMU? Because we want Dallas ISD students to be here because this is the school within Dallas ISD area. And they're like, oh, yes. And then that launched a whole, like, let's have all these other ISDs, from all over the DFW Metroplex come in. And so it's not about like making a check mark as it is about these individual people bring such value to the campus and can change the campus and this is a place for them. And it's not necessarily about checking a box. And I think one thing that I'm really hoping for, especially with our new diversity officers in all the schools, is taking that and putting it into the academics as well. Because I think we all can agree we've had courses where we're like, aren't there Black people that also wrote stuff or did things too? Like, why do we just have to learn about until a certain year in a certain group and then that's the end of the class? Why is it not included? And so I think I'm hoping that it extends not just to the campus culture, but also the curriculum, hiring, everything. So I think we're on our way.
Thank you all for that. In light of changing campus culture, as you were saying there, I want to ask a question to each of you individually in your experience. How have you felt, whether as minority or not as a minority, in your specific departments? Do you feel your colleagues are willing to take those extra steps, perhaps when you deal with racism directly on campus? Do you feel supported by your colleagues? I know Erika mentioned experiencing a bias moment herself, but how has it been for you if you have either experienced a moment like that, whether from a student or perhaps from SMU PD or in another kind of environment on campus?
I'll start. I think um, as an employee of the institution, I feel supported by the folks who matter, if I can say that. I think that there are always people in your context who are not all the way on board from their heart, right? They may be on board because that's what the institution is asking them to do, but they're not invested. And so I feel like the folks who need to be invested in my setting are invested. And it's just a matter of how do I want to say it, coalescing around what the priorities are and pushing those priorities forward. I think at any given time, you can have 20 priorities, right? But that's not going to make you most effective. You have to identify your top 2 or 3 and get those knocked out and then move on to the next ones, right? So I feel like there are no impediments, but maybe when, you sometimes you don't find an impediment until you push in a certain place. So, I'm hopeful. I feel encouraged, but there's a lot of work to be done.
I mean, I'll say that one. I mean, I represent my department, so I what I have to say about my department, I say very carefully is that yes, the majority of my department, they support change. They were shocked when they read, the Black at SMU. The people who read it were very shocked, and because my department was mentioned a few times, we're very embarrassed by some of the things that were said about people within my department. I think the issue, as with, and this is something, piggybacking on what Erika just said, is that some people, this also with what Ryan was saying, it's like they in their minds, they think they've checked off the box. They are philosophically in support of change and progress, but they don't understand how at the same time they may be undermining the change and progress. They are fully not conscious of that. They are deaf to it. And it takes somebody effectively either gently walking them over to the point where they can actually see it, or perhaps if they're hearing impaired, find some way to repair that impairment, because they really don't know. They believe that they are somehow immune to change and that they're exempt because of and it's an old problem. It's what I call it's a version of in rhetoric, argumentum ad baculum. It's argument with a club, where you kind of beat people over the head with your cred and say, I don't have to change because I did this. I marched with Dr. King back in the 1960s. I was an activist when I was a student, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, and therefore I don't actually have to listen to you. I can just continue on the same path and not change. That's the hardest thing to overcome, and that's something that takes a lot of work. You can't just yell at somebody and say you need to change, and or you're out. It has to be, unless somebody, of course, has done something really problematic and or illegal. You have to be able to say, we need to bring you back into the fold. If you're actually going to argue that you are that you really want to do the best for students, for the larger community, you have to understand that you're liable. You are not perfect, and you have to fully engage and do some self-reflection. That's a hard part. That's really what, the diversity officers that are being put in place are supposed to start helping with that. And I can tell you from what I've seen being on the Dean's Advisory Committee on this issue that there are real efforts, to start making those changes. It takes a lot of work because you can't just cancel somebody and just say that that's it. You actually have to say, no, you are still worthy, but you're going to have to work on yourself. And students are part of this. In fact, if Black at SMU had not if people had not spoken up, we might not be having this conversation tonight. That really, changed the tenor of a lot of conversations with administration, among faculty, and to say nothing of among students. And that was really important. That really had to happen. And SMU, I think, really had to address that. So this is something but it's an ongoing effort, but the students are very much part of it. If they had not done this, then the things would be very different.
It's interesting because I feel like I very much identify as an SMU type of person, like an SMU student, because as like what's been said so many times, like we wouldn't be here right now if these students weren't making their voice heard, organizing, making things happen. And I feel like when I was a student, I was that person saying like, hey, like this really could be better for all these reasons, and why is it the way that it is, and exactly can you explain to me, because that doesn't sound like a real reason. And I think that one thing that has been, I want to say, I guess, unfortunate, is that I found that I think I had less personal support the earlier in my career. And now that I am been here for a while, I'm the director of our office, I think I have, there's more of like a listening ear to what I have to say. And also I think because of the climate of these topics. And so, I mean, I definitely can recall bringing up issues and having, saying, hey, this person is doing a lot of stuff that is really inappropriate, and saying all these things. And I would get back, well, so if they're saying them around you, maybe like they're comfortable with you, so maybe you can talk to them about it. I'm like, okay, well, that's truly not what I'm paid for, to be here. So I feel like I've seen a shift in that, so which is good. But when it comes to individual support or what's happening with my colleagues, I think a big part of that too is honestly has been a shift for me being in the Meadows School. I think so many of our students here are Meadows students, and I think those conversations come up more, especially due to the creation of art and culture and reflecting, what's going on. I think those conversations happen more, and so we're a little bit more comfortable with them. But I will say that just support from colleagues, I've seen more of an increase in trying to have that. And also in reporting kind of things up the chain. I feel like it could be a combination of where I am, my title, my experience, all those things, fear of not being perceived as going against what forward motion is happening now. So I don't know if I should be critical of those things or be thankful for them, but I've seen improvement, I guess, in my own personal experience.
I'd say for me and for our office, it's I find my office to be definitely a very welcoming space, and like especially the immediate people, but we're in multicultural student affairs, right? And so by nature, all of us identify, or most of us, because we do have some colleagues, but most of us identify as people of color, right? And we that is like ingrained in the work that we do. And so personally, I feel very supported by my colleagues. I love them, they're great. But I think that what is hard sometimes is when I mean, I've had someone who works for me have a really traumatic experience with SMU PD, right? And to process that as someone who is, you know, not only experiencing it, but also advocating for the betterment of students and for this to not happen to any of our students, you know, that's like a lot to work through, right? And as a supervisor, my role in that moment is to, of course, you know, protect and advocate for my employee, but then also for the broader community, right? That there are things that need to happen. And so I think that it's also been interesting in this time that more people have been interested in having these conversations and at least open to pushing themselves out of their comfort zone, and that there was a group of people within student affairs that embarked on like a 30-day anti-racism, like reading, listening, talking conversation. There was like something to do on every single day for 30 days. And it was all anti-racism work. It was different podcasts, it was episodes, it was talks, it was reading through all the tweets from our very own students, right? Like we gathered these stories that not only localize the issue for them as I'm an individual who needs to do better, but also, and here is what's happening on our campus. And so I'm encouraged by things like that, where I don't know that students always see that, right? Because it's a process for a lot of people. And I know it's frustrating to be in the moment sometimes, but I do think like what's encouraging is that evolved into then a 30-day LGBTQ project, where through LGBTQ History Month, we explored what it means to support our trans and non-binary fellow colleagues and our queer students, and what does it mean to like really do some of the work. And so I do feel hopeful in those ways where that I have seen people on this campus want to engage with the work in ways that I think are going to make SMU a better place and a more supportive place for students across the board. But it's hard because you don't see that like right away, right? You know, as much as someone can learn in a talk and through reading and whatever, it still is a reflective process that we need people to like come along that journey and make progress. But I do think that on an SMU is like a very relationship driven institution. Like I think from the time that you're with admissions and, you know, all of you, I've seen so many people have great relationships with Ryan and all of their admissions counselors and with their professors, with staff members, with everything. And so as much as relationships do make SMU go round, I think they also have the potential to fully change and start to shift parts of SMU too, because I think that if more people saw those individual people really like engaging in actual anti-racist work and reading and acknowledging that their privilege, you know, plays into this larger picture, as much as they may be a nice person to you, they also see themselves in the systems. I think that that's helpful too. And I think it's hard to show that to students sometimes, that like we are doing work behind the scenes sometimes, and there are things that are not yet a fully shared product, but that there are so many people working on those things sometimes. And so as hard as it can be sometimes, I will say I've been more encouraged lately.
So in my role, of course, I've only been here for 3 years and only been the role as vice president for a few months. So I can't speak to the change, but what I can speak to, and I believe Dr. Dickson-Carr, you brought this up, is that we are a predominantly white university. So from a student perspective, there are students who believe that they're in the right, that they are an activist, that they support Black Lives Matter, they believe they're doing the right thing. But what we have to do, and what Taylor's done, I'll keep getting shout outs to Taylor, but she's done such great work, is that there's a difference between activism and an ally. You don't call yourself an ally, you earn the right to be an ally. And so the work has to be done, and you have to be able to really know how to support the different types of communities at SMU. And so regardless of where it was in the beginning, 10 years ago, for what I've seen is that there is an effort from students now to ensure that we know what to do and how to do it correctly, and how to support students and not just post a black square, but to really be an ally. And I think that's something that's super powerful, and that's something that we need to continue working on. And I think the hope is, and I believe, Erika, you brought it up. It's not just one talk that you attend. There has to be self-reflection constantly, and that's part of being an ally. We can't give this job to education and educating students to the Black community or to any minority group. It has to come from people outside of that group who are allies, and that it starts this cycle process where the breadth and the depth of it is much greater than any one community. And that's truly the only way I think that we can achieve this change that we're all after.
Thank you all. Thank you. We are wrapping up. We're getting to our last one or two questions. And I really like where the conversation is headed, because I know one commonality between us all is that we're all Mustangs of some sort. We are all SMU driven members of some sort. And in that case, we share this common ground, but a lot of us have different experiences within on this ground. So my question is to you is, what are 3 words when you hear campus life? What are 3 words? What are the first 3 words that come to your mind? And also, what are the 3 words that you'd like them to be?
When we think about SMU, sorry, you cut out for a moment. The first 3 words that come to mind when you think about
campus life. When you think about campus life, yes. And then what are the 3 words you would like them to be?
I'll start. I'll say the first 3 words go back to something that when I was interviewing here, somebody said to me, pleasant place to work. That's actually 4 words, but I mean, pleasant working conditions. If you want 3 words, but what I'd like to say is what I'd like to replace it are exciting working conditions. SMU is a good place to work. It really is, but as difficult as the pandemic has been, very hard on all of us, one thing I can say is that from my perspective, it's the past 6 months or so, 7 months really, have been seeing SMU be a very exciting place to work. The kind of challenges that the students have presented to the administration and really, again, made the administration do work that it probably was not really prepared to do. And really get people to start talking and thinking in new ways. That is very exciting. As Erika said earlier, that the sustaining that is going to be the hard work. It's always hard work, but that's been very exciting. I come to work thinking something new and different is going to happen at SMU today because the students are awake. I mean, and I don't mean woke. I mean, they're awake. They really want to see SMU become a better place for themselves and for those who follow them. And really to means like that expression, leave the campground better than you found it. And that's what I think is going to happen, because SMU, in some ways, it really needs the more it joins the larger community of universities in terms of really being engaged in that way, that's what makes it can make it a really exciting place to work, make students want to come here, because not only will they feel welcome, but they'll know that they can speak freely and openly, and it will be appreciated, be received, and that will improve the campus community.
I've been trying to think of 3 words, but I'm going to go 4 words and then I'm going to have 3 words. The first words that describe our campus life right now is that we aren't there yet, or we're working on it. And I think that's what this panel is about. We haven't achieved what we want, but I think everyone here in this discussion now and way past this, there's so much good going on, but we're not there yet, and we're working on it. And then the 3 words I would like to describe SMU is that we did it. We are there. And that, I think that is kind of the goal of this panel. That is the goal of a lot of work that's being done across campus. And so that's how I would describe it.
I really can't think of 3 words. So I think I'm going to have no comment on this this question.
Well, I think I'm going to also go in a little bit different direction, because I have 3 words, but I think they're the same because they are words that exist but can be improved. So my first word is community, because I think that, you know, it can be so isolating to come to college and be in a new space and have to find out new friends. And I'm the type of personality that I can talk to, you know, anything and anybody and, you know, say 15 stories before I even remember to introduce myself. So I understood that the way that I navigate things is not the same as everyone. And so I think that I really saw a lot of that in my time as both a student and also as an employee. And so I'd love to see that community that I know exists in certain groups extended. And you know, you have these events like we just had the other night with Celebration of Lights, and you have people who are in groups that never maybe communicate, all being able to be a part of these events and this kind of, you know, that, like you were saying, Kristen, this Mustangs community. But then also the next word is discovery. And I think in general, just in college, when you think about campus life, like you're trying to figure out who you are, what you want to do, what you want to be. And I think that I encourage students to do that. And one of the things that I told Tyne after the huge march that you all organized is that there are going to be students who are going to think back 20 years from now. They're going to think back to when they were in college, and they will remember that they either went to that protest, that they knew about it and they knew what was going on, and they chose not to go. They're going to remember kind of these moments. And I feel like you're navigating who you are and who you want to be. And I hope that we continue to have opportunities for students to push themselves to discover who they are and to explore. And also relational, because I think that truly has been something that has been just imperative to my SMU experience. I mean, it's kind of fun now that I get to work with a voice faculty member who, I mean, I literally only came to SMU because I had a voice lesson with her. It was a great lesson. I was like, oh, this is the best lesson I've had out of the people I've taken lessons with across the country. So I'm gonna go to SMU. And they're like, did you see Dallas Hall? And I was like, no. Did you see anything? No, but I'm coming. So all of this whole preconceived notion that people might have about SMU, like I didn't have, and it all kind of hit me when I got here. So I think all those things exist and there's room for growth, and I want to see them just be even stronger.
I think what I am also having trouble with the words, but I think that maybe an aspirational word that I'd want SMU to be is like truly vibrant. And I think a vibrant campus community, to me personally, means a campus community where people are engaging in actual discussion, in actual dialogue, who are intellectually curious and also willing to do the work, right? people who are willing to challenge each other, and students, faculty, and staff who are willing to challenge each other every day. I do agree that SMU has been a really exciting place to work because it's been different every day. Never know what adventure is going to come across, whether that's, come across Dallas Hot Lawn or just come across our screens. And I think that in order to, a truly vibrant place also would mean that we are helping all of our students thrive and not just get by at SMU, right? And so for me, I think that that's what that word would be, is like a truly vibrant community where all our students are engaging, feeling supported, have their basic needs met and more, who are not being bogged down by the processes and the systems, and are truly, getting that experience that they should be able to have here at a school. And I think there's so many pockets of that, and I think there's so many parts of it at the moment. And I think that when we can connect them so that we can guarantee that experience for more people, that's when SMU will be even greater.
Okay, so Erika has jogged my thinking. And so I think, now this is probably, you've asked me to do 3 words, and there are probably many words that I could use. But I think, as I think about it from the student's perspective, particularly my diversity students that I work with, that maybe they might experience it as an exclusive launching pad, right? That it is a place where you feel as though you have entered into this exclusive club, but you're at the door, you're in the room, but nobody is inviting you really into the space. Nobody is really reaching out to you and connecting to you, and you feel isolated and unsure, right? And I think that impacts then your experience when you feel like, the image of SMU is one where there is a lot of wealth and privilege. Now, that is not everybody's experience on the campus, but that's certainly the image that SMU, I don't know if SMU itself works hard to promote, or if that's just the image over time that has been created and it is hard to shed. You know what I mean? So I think my 3 words aspirationally with that is that it would be an inclusive launching pad, right? That marginalized students would come into the space and feel just as empowered and encouraged and, as part of the community as anyone else, regardless of whether or not you have differing opinions, but that everybody is valued and that their worth is recognized, and that their belonging is recognized, that they're not looked at as someone who is the other, but they're looked at as someone who is a part of SMU.
So well put. You guys have been a gift to have a panel with, honestly. Thank you guys so much for coming, for listening. Thank you for everyone who tuned in with us. It's also streaming on YouTube right now, so we'll be able to get you guys the link to be able to share. It has been an honor to talk with you all. Beautiful conversation. Thank you guys for coming.
I want to say thank you as well, just for being willing to listen to not only our questions, but the way y'all were bouncing off each other and asking questions and, filling in the blanks was really something great to see. And I think it's the start of having those kinds of dialogues that we need to have in the future. So I hope you're able to have those not only as individuals, but just amongst your colleagues and however else you walk through campus life, because, we're doing it every day. So
Thank you all for putting this on.
Thank you all.
You.
Yes,
Thank you guys. Have a lovely night. Thank you everyone who tuned in.
Bye-bye.
Night. Bye. So nice meeting y'all.
Yo, have a good one.